Hey everyone, welcome to Dangerous Werewolf. Are you brave enough to step into the perilous world of werewolves with me? Here, quiet witch, here. We'll uncover the secrets, face the fears, and explore the thrilling and dangerous aspects of these mythical creatures. So hold on tight and let's start this wild adventure together. To point 3, dog can't save you now. It felt strange driving to Gaspereau Mountain without picking up Julian Brutus, but it felt liberating too, knowing that nobody could stop her from doing anything today. She might pay for it later if her parents found out, but until then, Kim Mori could relish the solitude and freedom she'd been given to explore on her own. In the parking lot, she noticed a few cars already there. A red minivan and a black sedan sat together, and a rusty white pickup truck sat far off on the other side. She parked in the corner of the parking lot, strapped her backpack onto her shoulders, and slung her camera around her neck. A map of the mountain's hiking trails was folded and tucked into her back pocket, but Tamori didn't really need it. She'd walked the mountain so many times it was second home to her. Sending one last text to Julia to reassure her friend that they were still on good terms, Tim Mori hesitated and looked toward the trail. It was a clear, warm day, and she had her phone. What could go wrong? This wilderness was her domain. Tim Mori could forget who she was out here, if only for a moment. She plunged into the woods, driven by the chill of dawn. A breeze caressed the yellowing boughs of aspen leaves. Above, the air swelled with joyous and energetic birdsong in the wake of sunrise, and Tim Mori stopped often to listen. She memorized a few bird calls even now as they all mingled into one song. She could pick out the species. There were warblers, sparrows, and wrens and ravens, and in the distance she heard the knocking of a woodpecker while golden eagles cast silent shadows from above. She would brandish her camera, searching the canopy for movement and pointing her lens at every flutter of wings. The pale, yellow morning cast loving warmth over each subject that accentuated their earthy hues. She reviewed her photos before moving on. The main trail took her south along the western edge of the mountain. The trail climbed the mountainside on its south end, where the incline wasn't as steep. Then it would fall again as it rounded the eastern edge and curled north, back to the parking lot. That trail took a few hours and she'd be finished by 2 in the afternoon. But there were other, smaller trails of higher difficulty that would take her higher up the mountain to cliff sides that overlooked the town several kilometers away. If she meandered along the vertical trails, she wouldn't be back at her car until around 5, which was the ultimate goal. Rounding the western edge, Tim Mori met a fork in the trails. The main trail continued south, while a narrow path carved to the east, leading her straight up the mountain. Only a few minutes into the path did it become rocky, and Tim Mori had to clamber up ledges, reaching for titanic slabs of granite that pierced the earth. This smaller trail wasn't marked that well, but she still knew the way. Every opening in the trees, every flattened swath of leaf litter was an indication of where to go. She followed in the footsteps of countless explorers ahead of her, confident in navigation. Tim Mori paused often to gulp from her water bottle. Walking on an incline exhausted her ankles and knees, so she took a break halfway up the mountain, sitting herself on the edge of a rock overlooking a small stream. There, she took off her backpack and munched on a granola bar as she looked through the trees. The silence settled in after the birdsong died away. The forest was still, and for a moment she could believe that she wasn't even there merely observing, like she was just another piece of the landscape, like she belonged. There was a tranquility here that she never could have achieved with Julian Brutus. Suddenly, a rustle, then a crashing in the undergrowth beyond where she could see. Tim Mori's eyes snapped to the trees, then above as she watched a cloud of birds take to the air, chattering as they swirled and undulated and sought shelter elsewhere. The sound sent her heart thumping, but as she watched, the forest relaxed and breathed evenly again. Weird, she said out loud. Crumpling up the wrapper, She stuffed it in a pocket and threw her back on, pulling to her feet. It took another hour to reach the cliffside. The trees thinned and she saw more of the sky between the leaves. She emerged from the trail onto a broad ledge of dirt and rock that jutted from the ground like a stubborn lip, dotted with bushes that swayed as the wind grew stronger. Tim Mori drank in the fresh air, standing tall at the edge and looking over the sloping landscape below. Green, yellow, lit yellow, and orange treetops swept from the mountain like multi-colored carpet crisscrossed by narrow walking trails. Crystalline creeks poured down the slope, most dispersing a web of thin fingers or stopping at the concrete slabs of parking lots at its base. She saw stark gray roads running along either side of the mountain, between the forest and into the hills, and cradled in the thick masses of wildlife, she saw wolf go sprawling ahead. Tiny cars crawled the streets like ants in the grass, the roof of her house barely distinguishable among rows of suburbia. Beyond the town, the deep blue ocean hugged a barren shoreline. Tim Mori dangled her legs over the edge. She ate most of the lunch she packed away and over the view, observing the world like she was a god observing mortals, wondering if they ever stopped to think someone might be watching them. She would have camped out there for the rest of the day, enjoying the breeze and the heights and the solitude of her journey, but she still had to venture back down and didn't want to risk getting caught in the darkness. After a half hour of stillness, Tim Mori got up and took her photos, then went back down. On the way, she passed a group of hikers greeting her with enthusiasm, classmates and their friends from her graduating year. They were heading to a campsite to drink and dick around and extended the invitation, but Tim Mori declined. Mid-afternoon brought a veneer of opaque white cloud to the sky. Tim Mori had broken off the path on the southern rise to empty her bladder. As she pulled her shorts back up, there was a shuffling of leaves to her side. She stood and searched. Green and brown colors blended together the deeper into the forest she stared. But she didn't stare long. The forest had yet to prove its dangers to her. Only when she turned back to the main path, the rustling persisted. Out of instinct, she sent a second look behind her. Gleaming yellow eyes caught the sunlight. Tim Mori froze, meeting the gaze of a massive wolf in the trees, the very image of her hubris. Her stomach sunk with dread, hoping the animal would just pass her by. Instead, it stepped closer, eyes locked on her, just parting to sweep tongue across its lips. Its ribs protruded from its sides. She considered taking a picture of it, then realized she wasn't simply viewing an animal in the beauty of its natural habitat. This wolf must have come close for a reason. This wolf looked focused. This wolf walked with intent. This wolf was hungry, and it had just found Tim Mori alone and undefended. She let the camera dangle from her neck and backed away. The lone creature stalked closer, eyes flashing yellow to chartreuse, illusory and threatening. Dense timber fur streaked with black, teeth somehow strangely black. What could go wrong? She laughed at herself. Nothing outside of running into a sick, starving wolf. She laughed. Nervous, she bolted. The monster erupted after her, its hellish rumbles matching the crashing blood in her ears. Tim Mori ran in quick, long strides to the main path, but not quickly enough. She only made it a few steps before the wolf descended. Its just wrapped around her thigh, wrenching a scream. Tim Mori twisted around to smack its face away and found the wolf rooted to the ground. Its legs bent, its chest close to the dirt, anchoring itself like a dog playing tug, or while sickening black dribbled down its gums. Tim Mori's eyes bulged at the pain of its sharp teeth. It shook its head, digging deeper. She cried out and balled her fist, slamming against the wolf's head. The impact loose and the wolf scraped enough that Tim Mori slipped free, short-torn and stained red. She only had enough time to stumble and regain her footing, wasting her brief window of freedom. The wolf snarled and pinned her down, Tim Mori bent awkwardly over her backpack full of supplies. She watched its lips draw back over teeth glistening with oily saliva, and felt its hot, rancid breath on her chest. Tim Mori whimpered hysterically as she shoved her hands into its thick neck, trying to keep its teeth away from her face and her camera. It growled and snapped, adjusting its position as it loomed closer. Thoughts of impending death raced through her mind. She was waiting for the moment the wolf would break through and close its jaws over her throat. She was going to die here, and dear God, she wished that there was someone, anyone here to help, but she was aloneness, the dilemma of survival versus solitude. Did she bring this upon herself? She had to escape or else the forest would eat her alive. Fear held Tim Mori at the edge of action. A grating growl crawled out of the wolf, a voice primordial lie distorted. Tim Mori felt it trembling with something she didn't know: excitement, thrill. It was hard to rationalize past every sense amplified by adrenaline. But one thing that became certain was that the wolf wasn't just trying to eat her. There was a purposeful look in its wild eyes that made her think its goals were something else and that it knew exactly what it was doing. Tim Mori's thrashing elbow knocked the paquette knife attached to a cane hanging off the backpack. She'd forgotten about it, but now it seemed like her only option. Tim Mori reached back with one hand, struggling to unclip it. The wolf's tongue lolled out, centimeters from her cheek, grunting with zeal. She yanked the metal carabine until she pressed it open and slipped the paquette knife free. It took another second of fumbling before Tim Mori could open the blade and swing at the wolf. The blade sheared the greasy shoulder and slid into the open air. The wolf snarled and leaned away, and Tim Mori tried to roll only for the wolf to grab her backpack and viciously tear it open. All she could do was slide out of its straps and run. Wise to her trick, the wolf dropped the backpack and pursued. "Help! Somebody!" Tim Mori screamed. "Please." She exhausted her lungs, hoping anyone would hear her. Hot tears blurred her vision, a burning ache in her leg where the wolf had bitten her, in her feet, in her hands and fingernails and teeth. She shoved through stiff branches and leafy boughs that closed in around her, searching for the main path, but she couldn't find it. The forest was tightening its grip on her, swallowing her. Her foot snagged an upturned root, throwing her right back into the dirt. She landed on top of her camera, which knocked her breath out. Paquette knife dropped several feet behind. The wolf was on her in seconds, teeth in calf, dragging her back. Tim Mori kicked and grabbed the knife, swiping at it, but the wolf was incomprehensibly smart. It saw the knife and reeled away, then grabbed her arm. Her shredded flesh was nothing compared to the sheer pressure of its grip, and with a twist of its head and a sickening snap, her arm dislodged from the socket. The bone cracked. The wolf whipped its head from side to side, each time severing muscle and tendon until numbness and shock overwhelmed the pain. She could barely see it through teeth and blood. Her arm was in tatters. With what little strength she had left, she transferred the knife to her other hand and plunged it into the wolf's neck. The heat that ruptured from its wound was unimaginable. The wolf back pedaled in through her clouding sight. She watched it swing its head, unhanging its jaws a discomfort of the knife. Animalistic, unholy sounds belted out from the beast, gargling in agony. It leaned back and scratched at its neck until it kicked the knife free in a syrup of blood. It turned its ferocious eyes upon her. There was nothing more Tim Mori could do. No matter how far she ran, it would catch her. No matter how hard she fought, it would win. It made her so angry. This was her freedom being ripped away again. Her freedom taken by the forest instead. Her heart screamed louder than ever before. Tim Mori cried and scrambled back. The wolf lurched closer. Its brown fur was darkened with blood. Blood that stained its neck. Blood on the ground. Blood in its teeth. Blood. Red blood. Black. Its jaw hung open and the inside of its mouth was rotten black. Its distorted voice coughed free, tongue curling over noises that sounded like words. LLL at me. Distant voices rang out from the forest. Someone was shouting, LLL eat me. Each step closer intensified the stench in from its body. Something dripped out of the wolf's belly. Lay-tee-tee. Me Ian. Incandescent green eyes clawed at her head. Let me in, let me in, let me in. Another body smashed into the wolf in a whirlwind of snarls, growls, and barks. Her mind was fading. Visions of her assailant turned hazy, bodies melting into fuzzy silhouettes, indistinguishable from the wolf and the trees and the ground. Timori's eyes closed to the feeling of something grabbing her, accepting her death in a foggy hallucination of ripping and pulling and voices that blended into the tumultuous symphony of wicked nature. She accepted the teeth around her neck, that her feet would never run again, and that in the end solitude had become her. Timori surrendered to the forest and let it consume her. 1. Something personal privacy solo 68. We haven't been able to reach you. I'm calling regarding your monthly activity report from August. Can you tell me why your dispatch log is under quota? It's a slow period and I'm busy tracking. It's the end of summer. Herds are on the move. You can't expect them all to be hanging out at home, he said, sitting on the edge of a metal table in the basement of an empty house. Not empty, just lifeless right now, except for him. He picked at a deep scuff in the metal. Don't lecture us on the habits of a dyer, growled the voice. I thought I was exempt since I'm on a special target, he replied. It doesn't exempt you from reporting data. Your collection assignments have provided 0 DNA samples. He laid back on the table, legs dangling off. Well, if you wait for the end of September, you'll find my dispatch log significantly richer. What exactly can we expect? He stretched his hand above him, fingernails intact. He lifted his sweater and touched the bandages around his waist. I think they're secure. How? I don't know. They got black shit coming out of them. That's not normal, is it? I've never heard of that happening before. The voice fell quiet, tapping on the other end of the line. Something was transmitted and seen between them. He could feel it, however weakly. Seven Hill will have a representative in Wolfgall next weekend, the voice said finally. I'll forward you his contacts. Tell him what you saw. Is it dangerous? Prioritize your collection assignments to samples from sick individuals. He sat up. Is it dangerous? He repeated. That depends on how many there are. I don't know how many. Then find out. If it is, will you send backup? You know that discretion is our utmost concern regarding your target. The sensitive nature of this task requires as little internal interference as possible. Yeah, but Devo is up north. Her experiments may yet have something to do with this. Redact any mention of illness from your monthly reports. We cannot risk any of our activities leaking to other operatives, especially Castor and Devo. You'll remain solo on the target until further notice, said the voice. Can you confirm the contacts? He pulled the phone away and looked. There was a new message. Got them. You'll call him Sunday morning to meet. Do not let yourself be seen anywhere near the Diederich family before then. Sure. You've been stationed there long enough. We expected to have usable data by now. He wasn't interested in being nagged. I have usable data. You're sweeping it under the rug. We expect improvements on your report by the end of September. Fine. When the conversation was done, he looked at the message again. He hopped off the table and found a notepad out of the cupboard by the stainless steel sink matching the table, jotting down the contact details. A phone number and a name T. LaRouche's son. Then he deleted the message. Grumpy, the hunter sulked across the basement to the stairs, only to stub his toe on the corner of a dog kennel against the wall. Fuck. He hobbled the rest of the way, muttering, 3.2 something something personal privacy. Heavy footsteps thumped quick and close, muffled by a wall, punctuating the long din of something being dragged. 8-oar creaked open. Dinner's ready. Another thump, this one loud and clear. Ho, Donnie, you can't give her that. Her stomach's in a turn. What? What's better than a fresh deer? Anything. Go get a steak or something. There's no time for that. Look. She's moving. She's waking up. Gold afternoon light flooded the room in a row of bodies distancing themselves from where she lay. Her eyelids fluttered, gaze drifting between them and wondering if they were dreams. Everything felt warm and dizzy. This must be a dream. Slowly the figures focused into human shapes. As she glossed over their faces, she tuned into the ache across her limbs, in her chest, her stomach, her neck, her head, which then realized into a throbbing, deafening pain. She gasped for air, moving, but her body refused to move the way she expected it to. Her arms stretched and hovered before falling uselessly onto the mattress. Her other arm was pinned beneath her body. Her feet kicked. Something whacked against the wall. Relax. You're all right. One of the voices hushed. A man stepped closer. She curled her lip at him, startling herself with the fiendish sound she uttered. The man paused. She made out a head of blonde hair and a scruffy beard on his strong jawline. He looked at her with gentle eyes, reaching out to soothe her, but she felt only anger, confusion, and vicious distrust. Why was she here? How exactly did she get here? What happened before this? The wolf. Tim Mori opened her mouth to speak, but only a strangled clamor escaped. Her heart dropped and she reached for her mouth, her throat, desperately seeking explanation. But her arms couldn't move like that. She grasped at the mattress and craned her neck, spine long, battered legs blanketed in short fur ending in paws. She wiggled her fingers. The toes attached to the paws wiggled in response. Tim Mori yelped and fumbled to her feet, then lost balance and pinned a fluffy limb she never had before under herself. She searched for her body, but the body she once had was nowhere to be seen. Instead, it was paws and muscular legs all sticking out her rear, a large barrel chest covered in rich brown fur, and a long snout ending in a leathery nose. Like some kind of dog. Her panicked gaze flitted to the man and his companions, a younger man and older woman. She tried to ask what happened and garbled out a growl. "You're all right," he repeated. She stared at him, just agape. "Is your name Tim Mori Cross?" the man asked. She'd processed the question. Of course it was. She didn't feel like Tim Mori, but she knew that's who she was. Tim Mori nodded slowly. He stepped away and pulled a laundry basket full of objects in front of him, then pushed it toward the bed. Tim Mori examined the basket, nose twitching as she drank a plethora of smells that all delivered unique packets of information. Smells of her parents, her home, smells of food, smells of blood, smells of the wolf. Inside the baskets at her torn backpack, ripped clothes, her camera, and various other supplies that fell out in the fray. Her phone and her wallet sat on top. She rumbled inquisitively at him. "You were attacked yesterday by a wolf. Thankfully, we intercepted him before he could do any more harm. We got you to safety, but we couldn't stop. This," he explained, and gestured at all of her. Tim Mori looked down at herself. What was this? Was it the fact that she was a fucking dog and not a human? Did she die and they transplanted her brain into the body of the wolf that attacked her? Did she somehow change into a wolf like this was some goddamn fairy tale? "You're a werewolf." An anguished growl flowed from her teeth. That was absurd. There was no such thing, it was impossible, they were just myth. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream. But as she peered around the room, she found every detail too sharp, every sensation too real. It didn't make sense. A strong smell of blood set in her nasal canal. She pinpointed the source, a bleeding deer carcass lay at the feet of the younger man. "You're probably hungry, or you're gonna feel hungry real soon," the man said swiftly, "but you don't have to eat this. We have steaks too." Her tongue flicked and touched her nose, emphasizing the mouth-watering smell. Saliva pooled in her gums. There was indeed hunger brewing, more powerful than she'd ever known, but the sight of the carcass inspired both desire and sickness. She had this insatiable urge to sink her the flesh of that dead animal, and it was wear the fuck out. Tim Morey stared, grappling with the fragment of her humanity that said it was disgusting and her inexplicable oral desire. The rest of them were silent. Nobody seemed to know how to approach a freshly turned werewolf, and it showed. Nobody except the blonde man. "Tim Morey?" he asked. Her ear flicked, agitated. After seconds of indecision, she lurched. She stepped to the edge of the mattress, her body hovering. One leg. Her injured one flesh still gaping, and Rod tentatively reached the floor, testing paw on the wooden floorboards. Then came the other paw. The closer she got to the deer, the more tantalizing the aroma became. Tim Morey pulled off the bed to get closer, but underestimated the weight of her new body and collapsed on her tattered leg. She grunted with frustration, paws scrabbling. Her tongue lolled out of her mouth, gulping in the scent until she reached the carcass. Tim Morey assessed, sniffed, then ravensweeped it in, ripping high from the abdomen. The action felt right, but the moment the metallic taste of raw flesh hit her tongue, she gagged. The texture was thick, wet, tenuous jelly, but her stomach crumbled and urged for more. The first few bites were torture, then she tore chunks. She crunched bones as they met her teeth, spitting mouthfuls of fur and slurping down fat, licking viscera from her jaws until she had torn the deer's flank and pierced its precious innards. When she saw the arrangement of dark, glistening organs nestled within, Tim Morey felt a deeper hunger than ever before. She reeled, analyzing the discomfort in her digestive system, before tossing her head to the side and reproducing the meal. The others winced, covering their mouths at the stench of vomit. The upheaval racked and exhausted her, beating her slate next to her regurgitation. Tim Morey whimpered and scooted away from the carcass, looking pitifully at the strangers. "Water," said the blonde man. His younger companion stepped over Tim Morey, exiting the room. Through the open doorway she saw what lay beyond, a rustic hallway lined by light pine planks, walls adorned with framed photos of what looked like lakes and trees. Then the door closed, and Tim Morey backed away from the carcass, pushing against the side of the bed. The man exchanged a glance with the older woman. She had a firm look in her eyes, unaffected by Tim Morey's illness. The blonde man sighed and left the room as well, returning alongside the younger man with paper towels in hand. As he wiped from the floor, the younger man placed a bowl of water next to her. She caught his eye and thought he looked familiar, one of the hikers she passed by, a high school acquaintance. Tim Morey watched him dubiously, refreshing her throat and stomach with slow, ginger laps of her tongue. "Get that out of here," the blonde man instructed, gesturing to the spilled carcass. The younger man nodded, dragging it away. 3.3 something personal privacy. The woman crouched and examined Tim Morey as she drank. She kept her distance and Tim Morey stayed wary, flicking eyes up at the woman every now and then. Once Tim Morey drank her fill. She stepped back and curled her lip, the hairs along her spine rising. "You don't have to worry about me," said the woman, smiling. The blonde man bunched up the paper towels and shoved them in a small garbage container he brought in. "Yeah, Mom's the least of your worries. Donnie, though, kid's clumsier than a fawn. I'd watch my tail around him if I were you, he said. Tim Morey scrutinized them. She could make out the family resemblance, the low, sturdy cheekbones, the dark yellow hair. I'm Nathaniel Winters, but you can call me Nate, he said humbly, and then gestured to the woman. This is my mum, Deirdre. She's an Earth. She's here to make sure you transform safely. We're all werewolves. You, us, Donnie too. Her eyes narrowed. She could barely even believe that werewolves were a real thing. She wanted to call him a liar. How could it be possible that such myths lived without their existence getting caught into the world? We make up a pack. Nate continued. There's a bunch of us that live around town. Werewolves in Wolfgale. What a coincidence. Hey, you laughed. Tim Morey rolled her eyes, worsening the throb in her head. Anyway, you should probably stay here until your body recovers from the change. It's very exhausting to make the first transformation, and you've only slept a day. You should be resting for a couple days at least, especially after being sick. Stay here. Especially when he said she slept a whole day. A day since when? Since the attack. Since they found her. That was Saturday. That meant she would have been away from home for an entire day. It meant that today was Sunday and tomorrow she had class. Worst of all, she didn't know if her parents or Julia even knew where she was, or if she was safe. How was she going to deal with all that if they were going to keep her here for a few days? What if she said no, as if she could say anything at all? Tim Morey rumbled and shook her head side to side, disagreeing, uttering a wail of protest. Nate rubbed his chin. You can't do anything else. Your body is still healing. You nearly lost your arm. She examined her arm, recalling the snap of her bone in the wolf's teeth. The numbness of it hid well among her other aches. But regardless, there was no way Tim Morey could stay locked up here. Her body changed from human to wolf. Couldn't it change back? We know you have people worried about you. But I promise, we've let them know you're safe, Deirdre said as she reached out a hand to Tim Morey. Tim Morey jerked back, clicking teeth at the woman. Exchanging a look with Nate, Deirdre simply went to the door. She's going to be a handful, she said softly, as if Tim Morey wouldn't be able to hear it. But Tim Morey could hear everything. The growl bubbled. I'll tell your father she changed with no issue. See if you can't convince her to stay. She knew exactly what they were trying to do. This was her anger at the forest, at the wolf, at anyone who contained her. They had no right. Tim Morey was obliged to know when not to die, not to stay. Tim Morey met his stare with challenge to try something. She had teeth and he didn't, and she already escaped death once. Who said she couldn't do it again? He didn't approach. Nate leaned against the door, looking pensive, then crossed his legs on the floor. He said nothing as he reached behind his head, pulling his hair out of its messy bun. Meticulously he reworked his hair, gathering up all those loose strands before tucking it back into a fresh, tighter bun. She'd watched with admiration of his handiwork, but it didn't attenuate any part of her fury. Okay, I get you don't want to stay, he sighed. Tim Morey wailed loudly. This whole thing's gotta be a little scary. Nate leaned back, propping his elbows up on his knees. I mean, you don't even know us. This terrifying thing just happened to you and we're trying to keep you from going home. I get it. Really, this is even new to me. We don't really know how to handle it. Her noises dwindled to a defiant whine. We just don't know if it's safe for you to leave. You have to understand you're in a lot of danger. You werewolves are clumsy and there's a lot of threats out there. People get scared when they see a wolf. They could shoot you or call animal control. Not to mention if you were exposed, you'd be killed. There's people out there that know about us and they hate us. They'd snap you up in an instant. His worry sounded sincere, so she could give him points for that. But that was it. Tim Mori already made up her mind. There was no way she was going to stress out her parents or Julia by disappearing on them, nor was she about to miss classes that she'd pay way too much money for. Besides, she wouldn't be exposed if she could just change back into a human. Nate looked hopeful for her understanding. Then Tim Mori's phone buzzed with a text and she glimpsed the message from her mother. "Are you coming home for dinner?" Tim Mori locked eyes with Nate and barked. He groaned. "You really want to leave?" She thumped her tail on the floorboards. "Then you'll have to shift back. It's going to take a huge toll on your body and be very painful," he warned her. Tim Mori didn't care. It was the wolf's fault this happened. It was their fault she was here. Sure, she was still alive, but as long as she was still alive, she still had homework and social affairs and a whole life that dragged by. But damn it, it was hers and she had to carry on with it. So she lifted up on her shaky paws, imploring Nate to undo this. "You have to just kinda force your body back to the way it was." Tim Mori took his instruction and closed her eyes. Pain burned under her skin, deep in her bones, through every inch of her. She didn't know if it was working. Her head cocked down, and she couldn't feel anything yet. It just encouraged her to push further. Sheer determination, ignoring the warnings and resistance of her body. But she couldn't live like this as a wolf, locked up in some cabin in the woods. Then sharp agony in her spine twisted her, and the sudden movement kick-started the transformation that she summoned. A strangled yelp escaped as her vision blurred. The same agony that consumed her during the attack washed over her again. Dizziness and nausea, the snapping of bones. All at once she was expelled from her body. The force of it suffocated her, and within seconds, Tim Mori fell unconscious. Her body lost control. She was a cacophony of guttural howls, skin tearing and resealing, muscles ripping, bones twisting. Nate leapt up to help any way he could, but Tim Mori's determination set her on a course to fast to mitigate. He could only support her as she writhed and changed, swallowed again. One domestic name for a wild animal Tim Mori barely remembered leaving the pack house. Nate warned her that his pack's assistance would be limited as long as she was away from them. But Tim Mori, even though she wanted to return to normality so badly, found herself wishing they'd stick around just to punish them with her suffering. She blamed it all on them. The pain, the changing, the complications of this new lifestyle. She felt like they owed it to her. Even after deciding she'd pretend she hadn't turned into a wolf for a day, she was annoyed they could help no further. Tim Mori was exhausted, drifting in and out of consciousness, but whenever she returned, there was anger. Nate and Donnie drove her home in her car left in the parking lot. She didn't remember the way, so they gleaned the address from her driver's license. When they helped her to the door, her mother rushed out in a flurry, demanding to know what happened. Tim Mori heard Nate say something about an accident at a campsite party. Nate and Donnie swiftly escaped and left Tim Mori to the mercy of her parents, neither of whom could comprehend what happened to Tim Mori since she was last seen Saturday morning. They followed her up to her room where she collapsed on the bed, Christina asking why her arm was bandaged and why she looked like she had fallen down a flight of stairs. Wallace threatening that if Milo had anything to do with it, he'd throttle him. She mumbled a story Nate told her to give. She ran into some classmates on the trail, stayed for drinks, got drunk. There were pics on her phone. Apparently. Then she faded, remembering nothing until the next morning, her blaring alarm startling her awake. Tim Mori hadn't even changed out of her clothes, but she realized where the change of clothes she'd brought instead of the clothes she'd left in. Pale mud stains were evidence that someone washed her clothes before they got her into them. The thought that someone saw her outside of her clothes made her shudder, like her body had been perverted. More than it already was. It felt like it didn't belong to her anymore. Tim Mori exhaled, stiff in the chest. Her bandaged arm was useless, so with one hand she grabbed her phone and flicked through her unseen messages. Most of them were from her mother. There were some from Julia, worried that Tim Mori was angry at her silence. She buried her face in her pillow, not yet ready for the world. A quiet knock came on the other side of the bedroom door. Tim Mori peeled one eye open and grunted. "Tim, are you awake?" spoke her mother. Tim Mori cleared her throat. "Yeah. Can I come in?" She was silent, then decided she would like nothing better than her mother's comfort. If only pride hadn't soiled her ability to communicate it. "Yeah," she answered, bunching the blanket around her face. Christina slipped inside, bags under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept well that night or the night before. "How are you feeling?" Tim Mori rolled over, allowing room for her mother to sit. "Like I fell down a flight of stairs," Chiji rumped. "Drank yourself stupid this weekend." Christina smiled, but it faded quickly. Tim Mori nodded. "We were worried sick about you. You should have told us right away." "You look pretty rough," Christina said, pulling the covers away to examine Tim Mori's bandaged arm. "It's fine," Tim Mori answered, pulling them back. "There was a nurse at the party. It just hurts." "That's all." Christina brushed her hand over Tim Mori's unwashed hair. "Do you want to stay home?" Tim Mori nodded again. "All right. Your father said he'd drive Julia if she wants," she added, continuing to brush Tim Mori's hair, tucking it away from her face and under her head. Tim Mori sniffed. "Don't worry. I think she has a way there." She lied. The last thing she wanted was her father gossiping with Julia about how Tim Mori got extremely drunk at parties she never went to with classmates she would never hang out with. "Wait, Donnie." Christina's smile returned as she planted a soft kiss on her daughter's forehead. "I'll let you sleep then. Just shout if you need something." "Okay, Gerdita." She didn't have the energy to say anything else. Tim Mori watched her mother close the door and wanted so badly to tell her she was a saint. She felt bad ditching Julia, but she knew her friend was versatile. And once she told Julia she'd gotten hurt, she'd probably forgive the lack of a ride. Besides, Julia owed her after she bailed. Wasn't she the reason Mori got attacked in the first place? It was totally Julia's fault that Tim Mori was a shutter. Sigh, grown werewolf, or whatever. Tim Mori tapped out a text. "Hi, Jules. Had a rough weekend. Fell down some stairs, now my body hurts. Staying home today. I hope you can find a way to class. Say hi to Milo for me." She barely finished the text before closing her eyes and drifting off. Sometime later, the phone buzzed. Half asleep, she saw a text from an unknown number. "Hey, Tim Mori. It's mate. You doing all right?" Too domestic name for a wild animal, Tim Mori stared. "How did you get my number?" A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again. "Checked while you were out. Need to keep tabs on you now that you're one of us." She scoffed. "Not one of you. Hate to break it to you, but you are." That was irritating. "Says who?" Then she typed out another one. "Let's just pretend it and easier happened. No one needs to know. Can't let you just disappear off my radar like that. Tim Mori, you're my responsibility." How so?" "Can I just call you?" "Fine." Within seconds, her ringtone shattered the silence. She was grateful no one else was home and threw it on speakerphone. "Explain," Tim Mori said groggily. Nate's voice crackled on the other end. "Hey, Tim Mori." "Explain," Tim Mori said again. She heard him sigh. "Remember when I said cases like yours don't usually happen? We don't have a proper protocol for it. I'm the one that hey. Am I on speaker?" "It's fine. No one's around. Take me off," he said. Tim Mori begrudged the pain in her arm to hold the phone up to her face. "Okay, I'm the one that took over when we found you. I brought you back and looked after you. So now they expect me to make sure you don't blow our cover. I'm supposed to integrate you into our pack. But what if I don't want to be part of it? I have a choice too, she argued, which was a lot easier to do. She realized, when she wasn't a fucking dog. No, you don't. This is going to stay with you your whole life. Everything is going to change: what you eat, what you think, how you perceive everything. You can't ignore this. Besides, I'm trying to make it easier for you. I'm trying to help. I never asked for this. Tim Mori snipped. Nate got annoyed. Would you rather have died? She simmered, dwelling. There was nothing we could do to stop it. Sorry. All we can do is try to make it work. I want to make it work, Tim Mori, but you need to trust me. He insisted. I don't even know you. Then let's get to know each other, he suggested. Tim Mori wrinkled her nose. Fine. When are you free? Wednesday evening, Tim Mori said, glancing at the calendar on her wall. I'll pick you up, Nate offered. Text you then. And I feel it shouldn't have to be said, but Tim Mori, don't tell anyone. Nobody can know what happened. Yes, Dad, she sniffed. Nate hung up. Tim Mori put her phone down and closed her eyes. Thinking she'd sleep again, she felt so worn and racked, but something was off. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she still hadn't eaten. The last time she tried to, she'd thrown it all up. Maybe if she ate, she'd feel better. She laboriously emerged from bed, steadying against the bed frame and her table. Her legs quivered like jelly and her muscles screamed. Everything hurt. Was it always like this? Was it going to be like this forever? Tim Mori shuffled into the middle of the room, catching sight of herself in the mirror. She stood hunched, her usually shiny, wavy hair now ratty and tangled up. Her arms were covered in bruises of every size and color, her bandaged arms swollen. She lifted her shirt and saw the same bruises spotting her stomach and sides. Her thigh, where she'd been bitten, was bandaged and tender to the touch. I look like I died, she mused out loud. Walking to the kitchen was how Tim Mori nearly didn't make it. She had to stop halfway down the hallway, clinging to the wall as she willed her feet to move. Her knees throbbed when she finally made it. Tim Mori couldn't even open the fridge. She had to sit for 5 minutes. From the fridge, she laid out her options. Milk and cereal was always safe, but when she withdrew the milk from the frigid app and screwed the cap, she stuck her tongue out at the overpowering dairy. Next she tried cheese and crackers, but the stench of the cheese permeated her brain. She tried just crackers, but they were too dry. Even the lunch meat was unappealing with its briny aroma. Tim Mori settled for a tried and true remedy for an unsettled stomach: plain old bread. She pulled out the loaf and sat with it at the kitchen table, stuffing slices of rye into her mouth. A scratching gave her pause. Tim Mori tilted her head, angling her ear toward it. A negligible weight to the noise put it just on the other side of the kitchen wall. And she was beginning to smell something musty, dirty, warm. Tim Mori went to close the bread bag, only to find she'd eaten the entire loaf. Standing, she tiptoed to the wall. The scratching ceased. Then, when she stopped, it began again. Tim Mori painfully crouched and followed the length of the wall, eyes glued to where the skittering came from. It turned a corner and carried along the other wall. She watched. From a slit in the caulking along the floor, she saw a pink, twitching nose. The mouse poked its head out and looked around, then caught its beady gaze on her. Tim Mori froze, holding her breath as if hoping it wouldn't see her. The mouse retreated. Tim Mori sat on the floor. She listened until the mouse vanished beyond the walls. She stayed awake for another hour, playing on her phone and checking social media, perusing the photos that Donnie must have sent from his phone to hers. before sleep took her away. Then she woke in the evening, while her parents were home. She reassured them that she was okay and feeling well enough to attend classes tomorrow. Truthfully, the more she was awake, the stranger she felt. There were things she could sense that she'd never sensed before. Hungers, urges that she had never known and couldn't sate. She slept, unsatisfied and dreamless. When Tuesday morning came, she was glad to go back out into the world. Her injuries were less stiff now. When she usually would have worn capris and a tee, she covered herself in light sweater and jeans. Tim Mori relished the sausage and eggs her father made for breakfast, then packed herself a fair-sized lunch. When no one was looking, she tossed a pack of frozen bacon into her bag, just in case. Unsurprisingly, Julius warmed with questions when she pulled up to her house. Boy Meets Girl was on the radio again. Her engine growled louder than usual, and she had to roll the window up after gagging on the stench of exhaust. "I just fell down the stairs," she said, because she couldn't say she'd partied it up at a campsite. "Where?" asked Julia. "My cousin's place. They were having a party, but her boyfriend." She said quickly, "Oh, must have been pretty wild." "Yeah, kinda was." Tim Mori laughed weakly. She kicked herself for weaving another lie. It wasn't fair to Julia or her parents, but she couldn't tell them what really happened Doug. It would have been easier if she just died. No lies necessary, just the cold, sad truth of her departure. On Wednesday, Tim Mori repeated her explanation to Milo. He laughed it off and moved on, and the three of them sat for lunch. Tim Mori claimed she wasn't hungry after realizing what she usually packed for lunch was revolting. After lunch, she hid in a bathroom stall and shoveled strips of more raw bacon into her mouth, if only to sate her long enough to get home. She almost forgot about her plans with Nate before her phone buzzed. "I'm here." Chewing on an uncooked breakfast sausage, Tim Mori spied his black Mazda sitting outside. Her father saw it too. "Who's that?" he asked curiously. Tim Mori stuffed the rest of the sausage in her mouth before he could see and grabbed her bag. "A friend from school," she answered, heading for the door. Her father followed her into the kitchen. "A boyfriend," he prodded. "EW, I'll be back later." Tim Mori opened the door and glanced at her father. He looked strangely dejected. "I'll just tell you later. Okay. I have to go now. Love you." He managed to smile. Tim Mori flitted out to Nate's car, sliding into the passenger seat. The domestic name for a wild animal, Nate looked a lot nicer than when she saw him last. His hair was coiled up in a bun and dark sunglasses face. Instead of a loose white t-shirt, he dressed in red plaid, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He wore a strong wild cologne of lumber and earth, which she guessed meant he'd been out in the woods before this. It was easier to see him as attractive when she wasn't so mad at him, but like with Milo, she tamped it down and smothered it before it could spawn anything. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Humphrey's Burgers," Nate said, peeking at her from his lowered sunglasses. "Really?" Tim Mori scoffed. "No super secret occult cabin, no forest or anything, not even the edge of town." "No, I want coffee. And a burger. But what about all my questions? Won't people get suspicious?" "People talk about weirder things," said Nate. "But you yelled at me about being on speakerphone." "That's different. I don't know who else is there. This is literally the same thing." "Do you want burgers or not?" At the restaurant, they found a small table with 2 chairs right against the window. The waitress took their orders as she poured Nate a coffee. Tim Mori watched him sip and smack his lips with delight, but the overpowering smell of the bitter coffee made her stomach pinch. "You'll get used to it," he said. "So how long have you been like this?" She grimaced. Nate shrugged. My whole life. So you were born that way. Yeah, most are. It runs in our blood. Okay. And you said Timori whispered. Kak. Is that like all of you? Nate nodded. With Laika. As you know, like in real life, real wolves, an alpha or whatever. Actually no. Nate firmly set his coffee down. As he straightened up in his chair, she had a feeling she was in for a lecture. We're nothing like what they portray in popular media. We don't have that kind of hierarchy, which is fabricated, by the way, by people who took unrelated wolves from the wild and tried to study them as if they behaved the same in captivity. The whole concept of the alpha, beta, and omega is total personification bullshit. Wolf packs don't follow that structure in real life. Neither do we. Tim Morey followed the elaborate hand gestures accompanying his explanation. Of course, we have a leader. He keeps us all in check and makes sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But everyone contributes equally, and the voices of the young are valued as much as the voices of elders. A hierarchy like that keeps us strong and safe. Nate made it clear that he didn't agree with the idea of an alpha. Falling silent, he looked at the other patrons in the restaurant. Okay, and this leader, he's a pretty nice guy. He won't mind the fact that I'm busting into this thing you all have, she asked. Nate snorted. No, he's pretty happy to have fresh blood. Fresh blood, Tim Morey parroted. Speaking of, what do you do for meals? We hunt, or we buy steaks. Lots and lots of steaks. There are hunters that sell venison and moose and whatever else they shoot. We buy that too. And fish. There's no shortage of meat if you know where to look. Do you eat anything else? A diet of strictly meat, while appealing now, couldn't be fulfilling in the long run. As if on cue, the waitress appeared with their meals. Tim Morey tucked into her burger, speaking around it. Can I still eat chocolate? You can eat whatever you want. Just might make you sick, Nate said, reminding her not to gorge. How am I going to get into this stuff? I live with my parents. I go to university. How am I going to get away with hunting and all the wild animal shit you do? Nate stared out the window. We plan carefully. First, we can arrange outings. Then hopefully we'll develop some kind of routine. Tim Morey licked mustard off her finger, enjoying the spice, thinking, how could she play this off without rousing suspicion? Her parents would notice her leaving more often, and she couldn't always use Julia as an excuse. She'd have to hide her activities with Mate behind more lies. This was going to complicate everything. Okay, well, I guess I don't have any other choice. I'll give it a shot. Tim Morey sighed, crumpling a napkin. Nate replied with a warm smile. She popped fry after fry into her mouth, thinking of questions. Actually, there were a few burning at her. Tim Morey stopped eating. That wolf, she said quietly, glancing around. A woman with dark hair raised her eyes. The one that attacked me. Is it still out there? Nate stiffened. That's Lewis. He's been wreaking havoc around here for weeks. He's feral, he can't turn human anymore. We haven't been able to catch him, but we're getting close. For such a feral creature, Lewis was a surprisingly domestic name. She flared with righteous anger at him. What else has he done? Every recent wolf attack on dogs and livestock, even people hikers. Beekhauser, we believe it's Lewis. Most of his victims are women or young girls. The sick fuck. Mate spat, the hairs on his arms rising. And it's because of him we were afraid of being exposed. There's strangers snooping around Wolfgull, and if they caught him, it would endanger us all. We've been trying to take him down, and we almost had him on Saturday. Donnie was trying to lure him. Then we found you. Tim Morey's chest tightened as she imagined it all. His crimes, his violence, his perversion giving context to the memory of the wolf panting above her. Timori didn't want to think about what he would have done if he hadn't been driven off. She didn't want to relive that moment again, but the images came flashing back. His hulking and starving anatomy, his yellow, green translucent eyes. The inside of his mouth, black as ash. There was something about him, she said. He looked sick. Nate tilted his head. His teeth were all black. Timori pointed at her teeth. His mouth was rotting. He spoke. Nate looked dubious. We can't speak as wolves. I swear he spoke, murmured Timori. You didn't see how sick he looked. His eyes. What did he say? Timori looked at her hands. I don't really remember. Maybe he was trying to transform. He looked normal from what I could see, but it was kind of a mess. Nate went on. Was she remembering right? It felt like a nightmare when it was happening. Maybe those flashes of black were part of a nightmare she used to fill in the gaps. Maybe the words were artifacts of their voices above her, dragging her to safety. Timori stared hard at the wrinkles in her palms, at her fingernails, shiny and sharp and newlet. I want to take him down, she decided. Mate raised his hands. Tim, no. He'd rip you apart in a heartbeat. It almost happened once. Then teach me how to fight, or defend myself at least. That fuck is out there doing terrible things to girls like me. I'm not just going to sit by and let it happen, said Timori. No, Nate's voice hardened. You already have enough to worry about. Just let us take care of it. At least until you're better adjusted. She huffed and leaned back. Now she had a name to the face, the snarling, dripping monster with flashing eyes. Louis. If only she knew his smell. Maybe she could hunt him down. Nate went on about himself, how he recently finished a 3-year degree at Acadia and was hired as a conservation officer with Parks Canada in Annapolis Valley. Specifically, he tracked golden eagles that roosted in the coastal forests, monitoring their nest sites. He admitted that the convenience of his job did make living as a werewolf easier, especially when he did a lot of field work alone. He knew the mountain rails like the back of his hand. He and Timori had that in common. Timori reflected on her own life, how she worked a summer job at the farmer's market before university started. She was taking a full course load, and balancing school and her job was one of her first stresses. But her parents assured she could live with them rent-free as long as she went to school. That was ideal. Timori got bored of work too easily. She told him about Julia and this new kid Milo, and how she loved to hike and take photos, which Nate already figured out after recovering her phone and camera. He seemed to know everything about her already, as if he'd watched her from afar her whole life. But he said it came from her smells, her demeanor, and other clues he'd picked up on after rescuing her from the forest. By the end of their dinner date, it was dark outside. He drove her back and they sat in his car outside her house, arranging their next meeting, Friday night, since Julia was so adamant about them attending the grand opening of the Diederich Suites on Saturday. She was surprised to feel better about the whole werewolf thing after talking to Nate. Timori was leery of anything that infringed on her freedom, but Nate's reveries of wandering wild appealed to the nomadic explorer in her. Perhaps this life could be more liberating than she thought. Later that night, Timori reclined on her bed with her scuffed-up camera. She hadn't checked the photos from the hike yet, so while boiling water for her hot water bottle for her still aching arm, she flicked her photos. Most were close-ups of birds or squirrels or other animals she spotted on her walk. Some were shots of trees, and others of the distant wolf gull from when she was atop the ledge. It bewildered her that she took these photos before her life had changed so drastically. Examining a granite outcrop framed by towering spruce, she noticed something dark in the trunks. Timori zoomed in on the photo, realizing that the smudge took the shape of an animal. It was too blurry to make anything out, So she scrolled to the next photo. It was there too. A little clearer this time. A little closer. What were the chances she managed to capture this? Dark brown and gray fur. The body low in the undergrowth. Flashing eyes that caught the light with a mirror glow. Yellow no. Lens flare green. In every photo, the wolf was stalking, its teeth gaping and dark. Between curiosity and fear, she fled to an earlier set of photos, the droplets in the grass. Forward again, black body steaming out of shadows. She was consumed by the photos when her mother called. Tin your water's boiling. Fingers trembling, she set the camera down. Viewer still focused on the monster. Tim Mori hesitated to take her eyes off of it. After she filled her hot water bottle, Tim Mori came back to find the camera off. She brought the camera to her computer and printed out the enlarged images on her special photo paper, setting them on her desk for later examination. At some point in the night, the darkness in the photo shifted just a little. Thank you all so much for joining me on this dangerous werewolf journey. I hope you had your hearts pumping and your minds racing. Don't forget to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and come back for more exciting and dangerous tales. Until next time, stay safe and keep that adventurous spirit alive.